The first time I realized that Melissa, the self-proclaimed queen of our HOA, was completely out of control, I found a bright red violation notice taped to my front gate. My reinforced steel gate was legally permitted and approved, installed for privacy, and, most importantly, for the safety of my elderly father. But according to Melissa, my gate was an eyesore and disrupted the so-called harmony of the neighborhood. For 4 years, I had lived in peace. But as soon as Melissa became HOA president, she turned into a dictator. It started with petty complaints, but soon escalated into a full-scale war. I still remember the moment I first realized that Melissa wasn't just another nosy HOA president. She was a full-blown tyrant. It was early morning, and I had barely wiped the sleep from my eyes when I spotted the bright red violation notice flapping against my front gate. I frowned as I ripped it off and scanned the text. Unauthorized gated structure. Immediate removal required. My confusion quickly turned to frustration. I knew for a fact that my gate was fully legal. I had gone through all the necessary city paperwork, paid for the permits, and ensured that everything was up to code. My reinforced steel gate wasn't just a stylistic choice. It was a safety measure. My elderly father lived with me, and he wasn't as mobile as he used to be. If an emergency ever happened, or worse, if someone tried to break in, I needed time to get him to safety. That gate was my first line of defense. And yet, Melissa, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, had decided that my gate was an eyesore and had to go. I sighed, taking a deep breath. Maybe this was just a misunderstanding. Maybe if I talked to her like an adult, I could clear it up. That was my first mistake. Later that day, I walked up to Melissa's house. The moment she answered the door, I knew this conversation wasn't going to end well. She stood there with a smug look on her face, arms crossed like she had been expecting me. "Oh, it's you," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. I ignored her attitude and held up the violation notice. "Melissa, there must be some mistake. My gate is completely up to code. I have the permits." She scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "This isn't about permits," she said. "It's about maintaining the aesthetic integrity of our community." I blinked. "Excuse me." She gestured toward my house. "Look at your gate. It's big, it's metal, it's intimidating. We have a certain look we want to maintain, and your monstrosity is ruining it." I clenched my jaw, feeling my patience slipping. "Melissa, my gate is reinforced because I have an elderly father who needs security. I'm not taking it down just because you don't like how it looks." Her smirk widened. "Well then, maybe this isn't the right neighborhood for you." That was it. I had tried being reasonable. I had tried to have a civil discussion. But it was clear now, Melissa wasn't interested in rules or logic. She was on a power trip, and she was targeting me simply because she could. I squared my shoulders. "Melissa, my gate is staying. You don't have the authority to make me take it down." Her face darkened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of anger in her expression. The smugness vanished. "We'll see about that," she snapped before slamming the door in my face. As I walked back to my house, I had a sinking feeling that this wasn't the end of it. And I was right. I didn't have to wait long to find out what Melissa had planned next. Less than 48 hours after our heated conversation, I woke up to my phone vibrating with an alert from my security system. At first, I thought it was just a false alarm, a stray cat, maybe, or a delivery truck turning around in my driveway. But when I checked the live feed, my stomach dropped. Melissa's SUV was sitting at the bottom of my driveway, its headlights cutting through the darkness like a predator watching its prey. I sat up in bed, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. What the hell was she doing here? She wasn't just parked. She was lining up with my gate. A cold realization settled over me. Before I could even finish the thought, the SUV's engine roared to life. Then, in one horrifying instant, she floored it. The moment felt surreal. The crash was deafening. A brutal, metallic screech split the silence of the night as her vehicle slammed into my gate with full force. For a second, everything seemed to freeze. Then, the sound of hissing steam filled the air as her SUV bounced back like a toy car hitting a brick wall. Smoke curled from the crumpled front end of her vehicle, her bumper now an unrecognizable heap of twisted metal. But my gate? My reinforced steel gate. It barely moved. I scrambled out of bed, grabbing a hoodie as I rushed toward the front door. I could hear my elderly father's groggy voice from his room. "What was that?" he called out. "Stay inside, Dad," I shouted, already running outside. By the time I stepped onto my porch, Melissa was outside of her SUV, pacing back and forth, gripping her phone with white-knuckled rage. She had tried to ram through my gate, and she had failed spectacularly. My heart pounded in my chest as I stormed down my driveway. "Are you out of your damn mind?" I shouted. She whirled to face me, her eyes wild. "You broke my car," she screeched. I gaped at her. "You broke your car? You tried to plow through my gate. What the hell were you thinking?" Her face contorted with rage as she jabbed a manicured finger at me. "This is your fault. If you had just taken down that ugly thing like I told you to, this wouldn't have happened." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Melissa, you just attempted property destruction. That's literally a crime. Do you even realize that?" A flicker of doubt flashed across her face, but she quickly doubled down. "This is enforcement. I was enforcing HOA regulations." I gestured to the crumpled mess of her front bumper and the still-standing fortress of my steel gate. "With your SUV?" she huffed, flipping through her phone before glaring at me. "I'll sue you for damages." I scoffed. "Oh, please. Go ahead and explain to a judge how you crashed into my property. Let's see how well that works out for you." That's when she made her next big mistake. Despite the damage, the gate was still locked. But that didn't stop her from trying. She rattled the bars violently, yanking at them like a lunatic. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Melissa, you need to leave. Now." She ignored me, still yanking at the gate. "You don't belong here. This gate is a violation. You're ruining the neighborhood." That's when my floodlights kicked on. Bright, blinding white light flooded the driveway, illuminating everything in stark contrast. Melissa stumbled backward, shielding her eyes. "Turn that off," she snapped. "Nope," I said, my phone still recording. "I want the cameras to get a good look at you trespassing on my property." She froze. Her eyes darted to the security camera mounted above the gate, the red recording light blinking. She was caught. In 4K. I saw the panic flicker across her face. She knew she had screwed up. That's when she did the most predictable thing possible. She turned back toward her wrecked SUV, phone clutched in her hand, probably about to spin some ridiculous story to the police. So I beat her to it. I dialed 911. "Yes, I need officers at my address," I said, keeping my camera on her. "Someone just attempted to ram my gate with their vehicle and is now trespassing on my property." Melissa's eyes widened. She took a step forward, her voice suddenly syrupy sweet. Wait. Let's not get the police involved. We can handle this like adults." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you mean like how you just tried to destroy my gate?" She swallowed hard. Too late. I had evidence. And Melissa? Melissa was screwed. Melissa's face turned pale as she realized the weight of the situation. The security lights illuminated her, the red recording light on my camera blinked, and the police sirens in the distance grew louder. She took a shaky step forward, forcing a smile. "Look, Carter," she said, her voice trembling. "I think we got off on the wrong foot. Maybe we can just forget this ever happened." I scoffed. "Melissa, you just rammed my gate with your SUV and then tried to break onto my property. Do you really think I'm just going to let that slide?" Her smile wavered, and she quickly switched tactics. "Listen," she hissed, her voice low. "If you don't call the cops, I'll make sure the HOA leaves you alone. No more fines, no more violations. We can make this go away." I held up my phone, the recording still running. "You do realize that bribery is also a crime, right?" Melissa's lips curled into a snarl. "You have no idea who you're messing with." At that moment, 2 police cruisers pulled up in front of my house, their flashing lights illuminating the entire street. My neighbors, woken by the commotion, peeked through their curtains and stepped out onto their porches to watch. Melissa stiffened as 2 officers stepped out, one tall and broad-shouldered with a no-nonsense expression, the other younger but just as unimpressed. "Sir, you the homeowner?" the older officer asked as he approached me. I nodded. "Yes, and I have everything on video." Melissa's bravado crumbled. "Officers," she cried, rushing toward them. "Thank God you're here. This man," she pointed at me, "built an illegal gate and refused to comply with HOA regulations. I had to take matters into my own hands, and now he's trying to frame me." The officers exchanged a look before turning to me. "Sir," I didn't even hesitate. I played back the footage on my phone, showing Melissa's SUV speeding up and slamming into my gate, followed by her trespassing attempt. The younger officer let out a long whistle. "Wow, that's pretty clear-cut." Melissa's face drained of color. Wait. That's not what it looks like. The older officer sighed, rubbing his temple. Ma'am, you rammed your car into private property and then tried to break in. That's trespassing and attempted property damage. Melissa's eyes darted around as if searching for an escape route. I was defending the neighborhood, she screeched. This gate is a violation of HOA rules. It's an eyesore. I had to take action. The younger officer, still unimpressed, jotted something in his notepad. Ma'am, that's not how the law works. Melissa exploded. You don't understand. I run this community. I make the rules. He's the criminal here. He provoked me. Arrest him. The older officer let out a tired sigh. Ma'am, turn around. Melissa blinked. What? Turn around. Hands behind your back. No. This is ridiculous. I'm the victim here. You can't do this. She tried to back away, but the officer grabbed her wrist and spun her around, snapping the handcuffs onto her wrists with practiced efficiency. Melissa lost it. She thrashed against the officers, shrieking incoherent nonsense. I'll sue this entire police department. You'll regret this. You have no idea who I am. You can't do this to me. The younger officer sighed. Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it. By now, a crowd had gathered. Neighbors stood on their porches, some recording on their phones, whispering among themselves. I can't believe this is happening, I heard someone mutter. She had it coming, another neighbor said. Melissa continued screaming as the officers walked her toward the squad car. Just before they put her inside, she whipped her head around and glared at me with pure hatred. This isn't over, she spat. You're going to pay for this. I tilted my head and smirked. Melissa, you just got arrested in front of the entire neighborhood. I think I already won. The officers shut the car door, muffling her angry shouts as they drove off into the night. For a moment, I just stood there, breathing in the cool air, letting the reality sink in. Melissa, the tyrant of our HOA, the queen of harassment, the woman who thought she was untouchable, was finally gone. My dad stepped onto the porch, his cup of tea in hand. He let out a low whistle. Well, he said, taking a sip. That escalated quickly. I laughed, my adrenaline finally fading. Yeah, it did. But deep down, I had a feeling this wasn't the last I'd hear of Melissa. She wasn't the kind of person to accept defeat. And if she was willing to go this far already, I knew one thing for certain. Things were about to get a whole lot worse. I woke up the morning after Melissa's spectacular arrest feeling lighter than I had in months. The sun was shining, the air felt crisp, and for the first time in a long while, I thought the neighborhood would finally have some peace. But peace wasn't part of Melissa's vocabulary. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, expecting the world to be different. Instead, I was greeted by a fresh violation notice taped to my gate. I frowned, ripping it off and scanning the text. Emergency HOA ruling. Due to ongoing disruptions caused by non-compliant structures, all homeowners with private gates must have them inspected within 48 hours. Failure to comply will result in automatic fines and potential forced removal. I clenched my teeth. Melissa was literally in jail last night. How the hell was she still pulling this nonsense? I didn't have to guess who was behind it. I stormed over to the HOA office, and, sure enough, the moment I walked through the doors, I heard that voice. Well, if it isn't our local troublemaker, Melissa cooed. I froze. She was sitting at the HOA desk, wearing a brand new suit, sipping coffee like she hadn't spent the previous night in the back of a police cruiser. I barely glanced at the frazzled HOA secretary before snapping. What the hell is she doing here? The secretary, looking visibly uncomfortable, cleared her throat. Mr. Carter, Melissa was temporarily removed from the board due to legal matters. However, after an emergency vote this morning, the board reinstated her as acting HOA president. I blinked. You voted her back in? After she rammed my gate with a car? Melissa beamed. Oh, Carter, did you really think a little misunderstanding with the police would get rid of me? My fists clenched. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. Let me guess. This new inspection policy is just another way to get rid of my gate. She tilted her head innocently. Oh, don't be so paranoid. It's just a routine inspection. I narrowed my eyes. You can't just create a rule overnight and expect me to follow it. Melissa smirked and slid a stack of documents across the desk. Actually, I can. The HOA board approved this policy early this morning. Since you're such a fan of rules, I thought you'd appreciate a little administrative efficiency. I flipped through the paperwork, my blood boiling with every line I read. Homeowners with gates must submit a request for compliance certification. If deemed non-compliant, the HOA could issue removal orders and fine homeowners up to $500 per day for failure to comply. Melissa had fast-tracked an entire rule just to screw me over. I looked up at her, keeping my voice calm. This is harassment. Her grin widened. No, Carter. This is community maintenance. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. You can't win. I will get that gate removed. I squared my shoulders. We'll see about that. I stormed out of the office, furious but determined. Melissa thought she had won. She thought that because she had the HOA wrapped around her manicured little finger, I would just roll over and accept defeat. What she didn't realize was that I had done my homework, and she had just handed me the perfect opportunity to destroy her. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my binder. Yes, I had a binder. After months of dealing with Melissa's nonsense, I had documented every single HOA bylaw, complaint record, and incident report related to her leadership. And in my search, I found something golden. Melissa's entire HOA inspection rule was illegal. Buried deep in the HOA bylaws was a clause stating that any new policies affecting homeowner structures required a community vote to be enforceable. Melissa hadn't held a vote. She had just forced the rule through, thinking no one would challenge her. But I was going to challenge her, and I wasn't going to do it alone. The next morning, I started knocking on doors. First stop, the Johnsons. Retired, quiet, and usually avoided conflict. But Melissa had fined them $200 last year for unsightly garden decorations, aka a single lawn gnome. When I explained what she was trying to do, Mrs. Johnson's eyes darkened. That woman has been a menace for years, she hissed. Her usually soft-spoken husband slammed his coffee cup down. Count us in. 2 signatures down. Then the Roses. Melissa had fined them for putting up Christmas lights too early. They signed immediately. Then the Wongs. The Carters. The Patels. Everyone had a horror story. By the end of the day, I had over 30 signatures, more than enough to challenge Melissa's inspection rule and force a real vote. But I wasn't done yet. I needed public exposure. So I did something Melissa never expected. I went straight to social media. I created a neighborhood Facebook group titled HOA Reform, Taking Back Our Community. Within hours, the group exploded. People started sharing their own Melissa horror stories. She fined me for overgrown grass when I was on vacation for 3 days. She charged me $50 because my garbage bin was too visible from the street. She tried to make me repaint my house because she didn't like the shade of beige. By the end of the day, we had 80+ members. By the next morning, over 100. Melissa's power was crumbling, and she didn't even know it yet. Then came the final move. I emailed the HOA board with my official challenge to Melissa's new rule, citing the bylaw she had ignored. By HOA regulations, they had no choice but to schedule a formal vote. And when Melissa found out, she lost her mind. That afternoon, as I was watering my lawn, I heard the familiar clack of heels storming toward me. I turned just in time to see Melissa marching up my driveway, her clipboard clutched in one hand, her eyes burning with fury. She stopped inches away from me, her voice low and dangerous. You think you're so clever, don't you? I kept watering the lawn. Oh, I don't think, Melissa. I know. Her fingers tightened around her clipboard. You have no idea who you're messing with. I turned off the hose, tilting my head. Didn't you say that right before you got arrested? Her nostrils flared. Enjoy this little victory while it lasts, Carter, she spat. You've made a big mistake. And with that, she spun on her heel and stormed away. But for the first time since this war began, Melissa was scared. Melissa thought she had won. She believed that because she still had allies in the HOA, she could keep making my life miserable. But what she didn't realize was that I was done playing by her rules. If she wanted to weaponize bureaucracy, I was going to turn the entire city against her. That night, after securing my HOA petition, I dug into city zoning laws. I wasn't looking for any violations against me. I was looking for something on Melissa. After 2 hours of combing through property records, I found it. Melissa had a major problem. Her house, which she had lived in for over a decade, was in direct violation of city zoning laws. Specifically, she had expanded her backyard fence illegally. According to the city's zoning regulations, All fences had to be at least 10 feet away from a protected drainage area. Melissa's fence? It was only 4 feet away, a clear violation of city code. And unlike my situation, where she had manipulated the HOA to revoke my gate permit, her violation had been on record for years. It just had never been reported. Until now. The next morning, I drafted an official complaint to the city's building and zoning department. I kept it professional, polite, and strategic. Subject: zoning violation inquiry. Dear Building and Zoning Department, as a concerned homeowner, I recently came across a potential zoning violation at Melissa's address. According to city property records, fences must be at least 10 feet away from protected drainage areas. However, the fence at this property appears to be well within that limit. I would appreciate an official review to ensure compliance with city regulations. Please let me know if any further information is needed. Sincerely, a concerned homeowner. I hit send. And then, I waited. It didn't take long. The next morning, I got a call. Not from the city. From Greg, one of the few HOA board members who had never fully supported Melissa. Dude, he said the second I picked up. What did you do? I smiled. What do you mean? Melissa's flipping out. I leaned back in my chair, savoring the moment. Why? The city showed up at her house this morning. Something about a zoning violation. I grinned. Sounds serious. Greg laughed. She's losing her mind. She was ranting about how some loser neighbor must have snitched on her. I feigned surprise. Wow, tough break. Greg chuckled. Dude, I don't know how you pulled this off, but it's the best thing that's ever happened to this neighborhood. That afternoon, I stepped outside just in time to see Melissa pacing in her driveway, her phone pressed to her ear, looking like she was on the verge of a meltdown. I strolled over, pretending not to notice her distress. She whipped around the second she saw me, eyes blazing. You did this. I raised an eyebrow. Did what? She jabbed a shaking finger toward her backyard. The city is threatening to fine me for my fence. I faked shock. Wow, that sounds serious. Her face twisted with fury. You think this is funny? I crossed my arms. Melissa, I'm just following the rules. Isn't that what you always say? She clenched her fists, practically vibrating with rage. You think this means you've won? You haven't. I smirked. Melissa, the city is telling you to remove your fence. There's no HOA to manipulate this time. Her mouth opened and closed as she tried to formulate a response. But she had nothing. That evening, I got an email from the building and zoning department. They had reviewed my case. Turns out, the only reason my gate permit had been revoked was due to a technicality, a missing document in the city's database, which meant my permit revocation was invalid. I refiled my permits, attached the original paperwork, and within 12 hours, my gate was legally reinstated. Melissa had used the city against me, and now, the city had turned against her. The next morning, I stepped outside just as a city inspector arrived at Melissa's house. She was already outside, arguing with him. This is ridiculous, she screamed. I've had that fence for years. The inspector remained unmoved. And it's been in violation of city code for years. You need to apply for a variance or remove it. Melissa's hands shook with fury. This is harassment. Who even reported this? The inspector didn't answer. You have 72 hours to comply. Failure to do so will result in daily fines. I bit back a grin. 72 hours. The exact same deadline she had tried to give me. That evening, I saw her standing outside, staring at her fence, seething. She caught me watching. For the first time since this war started, her face wasn't smug. It was defeated, because she knew I had beaten her. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with her own rules. Melissa had spent years weaponizing bureaucracy against the neighborhood. And in the end, it was bureaucracy that destroyed her. The next morning, Melissa's fence was gone. I made sure to water my lawn at the exact moment the contractors tore it down. Standing there, coffee in hand, enjoying the show. She refused to look at me, but I saw the way her shoulders tensed when I said, wow, what a shame. I thought it really added to the neighborhood aesthetics. She stormed inside, slamming the door behind her. And for the first time since this nightmare started, the neighborhood finally felt peaceful. I thought it was over. Melissa had been publicly humiliated, removed from her HOA throne, and forced to tear down her illegal fence. The city had turned against her. The neighborhood had turned against her. But Melissa wasn't the type to accept defeat. And her final move? It was the most unhinged thing she had ever done. It started subtly. Little things at first, things I didn't even connect to her. One morning, I stepped outside to grab the newspaper and found my trash bins knocked over, garbage strewn across my lawn. Annoying, sure, but accidents happened. Then, a few nights later, I woke up to the sound of scratching outside my house. When I checked the security cameras, I saw nothing. But the next morning, I found deep gouge marks along my fence, as if someone had taken a metal rake to it. It was deliberate. Still, I had no proof it was Melissa. Then things got worse. A few days later, I received an anonymous letter in the mail. No return address. No signature. Just a single piece of paper with 3 words. Get out now. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't HOA harassment anymore. This was personal. The breaking point came when I finally caught her in the act. It was 2 a.m. when my security cameras triggered an alert. I expected to see nothing. Maybe a stray cat. Instead, I saw her. Melissa. She was lurking near my mailbox, dressed in a dark hoodie, something completely unlike her usual put-together, professional image. And in her hand, a can of spray paint. My blood boiled. I grabbed my phone and called the police immediately. Then I watched. Melissa walked up to my fence and started spray painting something on it. She was so focused on her vandalism that she didn't hear the sirens until it was too late. The police arrived in under 2 minutes and caught her mid-sprint as she tried to flee. I stepped outside just as the officers grabbed her by the arm, stopping her escape. She was breathing heavily, her eyes darting around like a trapped animal. One officer looked at me. This your property? I crossed my arms. Yep. And I have security footage of her trespassing. Melissa's head snapped toward me, her face twisting with fury. You set me up, she shrieked. I raised an eyebrow. Melissa, you're literally holding a can of spray paint. The officer looked at her hands, then at my fence. In big, dripping red letters, Melissa had painted, "Neighborhood scum." There was no getting out of this. As they handcuffed her, she lost it. I was protecting this community, she screamed. He doesn't belong here. I let out a dry laugh. That's rich, coming from someone who just vandalized private property. The officer sighed. Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent. Melissa screamed the entire time they loaded her into the squad car. She threatened to sue. She threatened the police. She threatened me. But none of it mattered. Because this time, there were real consequences. By the next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. Melissa had been charged with trespassing, vandalism, and harassment. And because she was already on thin ice from the property damage incident with her SUV, the judge denied her bail. For the first time in her life, Melissa had no way out. The Facebook group exploded with comments. I can't believe she actually got arrested. Justice, finally. Good riddance. That woman was a menace. But my favorite? I hope she enjoys her new HOA in prison. Melissa wasn't coming back from this. But I had one last thing to do, the ultimate payback. To make sure that when Melissa got out, she would never dare mess with me again. For 2 days after Melissa's arrest, the neighborhood felt different. Quieter. Lighter. It was the first time in months that I didn't feel like I had to check my security cameras every 5 minutes. I thought it was over. I was wrong. Because Melissa? She wasn't done yet. And her final act? It was the most dangerous one yet. It happened on the 3rd night after her arrest. I was sitting in my living room, half watching TV, when I heard it, a sharp metallic clatter from outside. Then, a low creaking noise, like metal straining under pressure. I immediately pulled up my security cameras. What I saw? I thought I was hallucinating. Melissa was back, and she was standing in front of my gate, with a crowbar. My blood ran cold. She had just been arrested for vandalizing my property, and now she was back, escalating to full-on destruction. I grabbed my phone and called 911 immediately. As I waited, I watched the screen, my heart pounding. Melissa was prying at the hinges of my gate, her movements erratic, desperate. Her hair was a mess. She was still wearing the same outfit from her mugshot, and her eyes were wild. Like she had lost all reason. Like she had snapped. I didn't wait. I stepped outside, phone in hand. Melissa dropped the crowbar and spun around, eyes flashing with pure rage. You ruined my life, she shrieked. I had everything, and now I have nothing because of you. I held my ground. Melissa, you did this to yourself. Her hands tightened into fists. And for the first time, I saw it. The moment she actually considered using the crowbar on me. Then, sirens in the distance. Melissa heard them too. Her face twisted. She dropped the crowbar and ran. She didn't make it far. The police arrived within seconds, and this time, Melissa was gone for good. The nightmare was finally over. Lesson learned. This story is a powerful reminder that standing up for yourself matters. Bullies thrive on fear and intimidation, but when you know your rights and take smart, calculated action, you can fight back. Melissa believed she was untouchable, but in the end, her own tactics destroyed her. If you're facing a similar situation, remember, know the rules. Whether it's HOA policies, city regulations, or legal protections, knowledge is power. Document everything. Keep records, take videos, and never rely on just your word. Stay calm and strategic. Reacting emotionally only fuels the bully. Plan your moves carefully. Use their own rules against them. Bureaucracy can be annoying, but when used correctly, it can also be your greatest weapon. Final thoughts. Melissa's downfall was inevitable. She underestimated the power of persistence, strategy, and community. At the end of the day, justice always prevails. And sometimes, it's just really satisfying to watch karma do its job. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more real-life tales of justice, revenge, and people getting exactly what they deserve, make sure to subscribe to Story Precious. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever dealt with a nightmare HOA or an entitled neighbor? Let's discuss. Follow Story Precious for more captivating stories.